Hey everyone, here's a quick video on how I free up my seized brake lines. So you're going to want to use a flare nut wrench like this, not an open-ended like this. As you can see here, I'm kind of pushing and flexing this brake line and it's not moving like it should. I'm going to apply some heat on the metal brake line on the right there, just a crappy old Mastercraft heat gun, on the high setting with a small sort of focus nozzle on it. You never want to use a torch on stuff like this. If you heat up that rubber brake line that's on the left in this video, I've had them explode in my face a few times like a water balloon full of steaming hot brake fluid, so you don't want to do that. I'm taking my time here working around that metal flare nut with the heat gun slowly. I'm going to check that rubber brake line and make sure it's not getting too hot periodically. And then here, I'm not using these vice grips to try and grip the brake line on the right. I'm actually grabbing the end of the fitting on the rubber brake line, and I'm using this hammer to try and shock it loose. There's no real good spot to hit these fittings with a hammer, and I wouldn't suggest it anyways, but these are just techniques I've learned to get stuff like this loose without catching anything on fire or really breaking stuff. Once I'm done with the first round of heat, I'll give it a little shot of creeping penetrating oil, and usually you'll watch it work its way in through the threads. Now I got this thing a little bit loose here. I'm wiggling it back and forth and going very slowly. You'll notice that I'm being mindful of that steel line because it's twisting inside the flare nut. Or rather, it's stuck to the inside of the flare nut and the whole assembly is twisting. This is not good. Here's a little better example of it. You can see how that line goes through that steel nut there, and it's twisting as one unit. So I'm going to go back in here, heat this up a few times again. I put a wet rag around the steel line because it absorbs a lot of heat. And also what's going to happen here is you can keep the line relatively cool while you're heating up the nut, and it causes it to separate a little bit better. Now I've got a lot of smoke because there's brake fluid coming out, which means I need to stop. So I'm going to work this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth slowly, gripping the other end of that line at the fitting and the chunkiest part with vice grips. Now, after a lot of patience and holding the line and making sure it's not stuck inside the flare nut anymore, you can see that I got this thing loose and it actually just spins freely. I'll go into a little deeper detail here and explain that the reason I'm replacing this brake line is because my right rear caliper keeps hanging up and it's eating through brake pads. I did replace the caliper yesterday, but I found that even after replacing the rusty old caliper, it was still hard to push the new piston back in the new caliper. So in this part of the video, I've got that brake line cracked loose still, completely taken out, so that I can now push the piston back again and see how much resistance I get behind it. If it's once again difficult to push this piston back, even with just a rubber line open on one end, it means that there's some sort of contamination inside that line, or it's collapsed inside, those sorts of things, and it's not allowing fluid to get back up to your master fluid reservoir. I was able to get the piston to go back in place all the way to its stop after I cracked this line loose and pushed it back, but to be honest, there's a fair bit of resistance there still. And when I push the piston back with just the bleeder screw open, I could almost do it with my thumbs. So I'm going to go ahead and replace this line. I suspect it's failing anyway, and it's time to do it. And that is about it for this job. I'm going to have to go back into town, get this rubber brake line. I kind of wanted to make sure that I could get the metal line out first so that I don't get stranded and have to go back into town again like I usually do. And then obviously after I did all that, I need to bleed the brake system again. So I'm in here pumping it 5 times, let it come up slowly. And what I do when I'm by myself is I have like this little kind of brake depressor caulking gun extension kind of thing, and I'll start the engine up so that I get full brake pressure on that brake pedal. I'll crank this thing up against the seat fairly tight. Just be careful you're not ripping anything, but you're usually good. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to crack this bleeder screw. Doesn't look like I got a whole lot of air in this. I'm going to go back and do that one more time, and I think we're good to go. I hope this video helped you. Please consider liking and subscribing.